Welcome, and thank you for attending our presentation. Bradley and I are very excited to share our research and findings with you today. This research began while Bradley and I were discussing and comparing the ways in which we both teach composition. Through our discussion, we came to a realization that much of our insight into composition pedagogy primarily came from our own firsthand experience. By the end of the conversation, the first stage of this research had begun. While there's been a growing amount of research related to composition pedagogy, most of this research falls into a few general categories. Some are case studies about specific institutions or teachers. Some are geared more towards the primary or secondary education system, and others are technical analysis of specific composers' compositional style or technique. So composition pedagogy needed a broad overview of how composition professors are currently teaching, as well as an understanding of what institutions value. Our solution to this was to create a survey that polled composition instructors from across the nation. So our goal for this survey was to gather general information about how students at the undergraduate level learn composition. We wanted to gather data about what professors value on a philosophical level, observe institutional trends within the undergraduate curriculum, and learn where future research needed to be directed.
So before we can really start talking about the data we collected, we need to talk a little bit about the survey itself, its development, and its basic sections. So firstly, we developed this, and I'm sorry, it's cutting off a little bit, but we'll make do. It was broad in scope. It was really thinking as a foundation for future studies and research. Like, this is like the starting point that we were thinking. And our goal was really to collect basic information about teachers, universities, programs, and what they prioritize during an undergraduate degree in composition, just like Andy just said. So one of the reasons for this is in the review of the literature we did, we found that, and I'm sure many of you found the same thing, there's a dearth of this research out there, and a lot of the research we found presupposes what we should teach in lieu of, like, just here's how we teach. So we wanted to really reach the what before we reached the how. So this is really an answer of the what, or at least how many schools answer the what. So this survey was done in 4 main sections. University and program info, just what type of university do you teach at? Research institution, small liberal arts college. The skill and experience ranking, which is the most important aspect of the survey, which we'll talk about much more in depth in a moment. Miscellaneous questions, if we didn't know where it went, we put it there. And finally, participant info, things like demographics, stuff like that. We collected contacts from the College Music Society Directory of Music Faculties, which is this great repository of not all, but most of the music programs in the United States, because we needed people to send this survey to. And from that list, there you go. We sent it to 347 contacts with a total of 114 respondents, which is a fairly good response rate, especially for a survey of this size. It's about a little over or a little under a third. So let's keep talking about the skill and experience ranking itself. Again, this is the most important aspect of the survey and really represents what we were trying to discover. So in order to find out what is being taught, participants ranked various compositional skills and experiences based on importance or priority for students during their undergraduate degree. Now, this part's important because when we sent out the survey, we didn't want to send out a list of skills and experiences that composers need to have because we were worried that everyone would just rank everything very highly, because as we know, composition is a synthesis of many multifaceted skills. So we wanted to kind of constrain it somehow. So we constrained it to the 4-year undergraduate degree, because you have to make concessions when you're dealing with 4 years, which I know it feels like it to undergraduates, but it's not a lot of time at all to teach this very, very complex skill set. And also, again, they were ranking the skill not as not importance in general, but importance to the program. So in order to do this, we had to actually come up with a list of skills, which was hard, very, very difficult. And we had kind of 2 goals for this. One was to make this list as comprehensive as possible, and the opposing goal of making it as short as possible. You're laughing, I know why, because good Lord. We know how many skills go into composition, so this was tough. And we developed it in kind of a 3-round process. I say rounds, but it didn't happen one after the other. It was kind of like together. The first was just Andy and I's professional and personal experience. We just kind of went our separate ways and came up with our own list of what we felt was important. But we didn't want to keep it there because we didn't want to show our own biases, because I think there's a talk right after this about the importance of form, which I would rank number one because I'm huge about form. Those of you who are my composition students know that. But we didn't want to keep it just to what we thought was important. So next phase, books and articles on composition technique and pedagogy. What did other published sources say was important to the skill set of a young composer? And then finally, when we got a list that we were happy with, we sent it to a bunch of colleagues for their input about how to like maybe synthesize a bit more, or maybe add a couple things here and there, and we developed the list in this way. More about that list later. A couple more things about this ranking. So we found it useful to categorize these skill sets, basically in order to kind of focus our thinking a little bit, and we did so in a system partially proposed by Benjamin John Williams in a dissertation called Music Composition Pedagogy, A History, Philosophy, and Guide, which is this great dissertation he wrote at the University of Ohio. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. It's the history of composition pedagogy, a long history, and plus some information at the end about how about a proposed method of composition. And he identified 2 competencies. We've actually heard a little bit about this from other presentations earlier today and yesterday. Technical competencies, things like instrumentation, notation, stuff like that. And then creative competencies like originality, innovativeness, developing your individual style, stuff like that. And from that, we also added 2 more categories, career and supporting activities. So career is fairly self-evident, like ways to support your career, like organizing and things like that. You might be wondering why I keep saying skills and experience ranking, and that has to do with this supporting activities category, where there are these things that we do as composers that isn't necessarily learning to compose or learning a skill set to compose, but things to kind of expand our thinking, things like master classes or seeking out musics of unfamiliar to us, or different types of art forms. So that's really what we're going to call an experience. So we're calling, in the survey, supporting activity. Here we categorize backwards. In the survey, it's experiences. Here we're calling it supporting activities. And one thing to think about this is not every skill we came up with fits nicely and snugly into one of these categories. It was useful for development, like orchestration, technical competency, but if certain composers have taught us anything, straight in the creative competencies as well. People like Ravel and many, many others, Chris Abels, for instance. And then the participants ranked these skills and experiences in a few different ways, twice actually. First, their individual opinion of how important it was to the 4-year curriculum. They ranked it on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not important and 5 being of highest importance. And then finally, their perceived institutional importance. Basically, did they feel that the institution they were at prioritized this either at no priority or highest priority from 1 to 5? So basically, as we're going through this, the data you're going to see, if it's at a 5, that means it's very important or highest priority according to that submitter, and if it's at nearer to a 1, that means it's not important or no priority. And then finally, we developed this list of 40 skills and experiences, and that's my cue to tell you to go ahead and pass out that handout I gave you. Thank you very much, Ryan. His name is Ryan Johnson, by the way. Everyone give him a hand. So we developed this into a 40 skills and experience list. And 40 might sound like a lot to some and not enough to others. Trust me, this is whittled down from a giant list. So we're not going to go through every single one of these skills here, but one quick thing I wanted to mention is that some of these might sound a little bit vague because we wanted to keep them very tiny in the survey. Something like media composition could be a couple of different things, but we defined it further in the survey as media composition, for instance, writing for film, television, and video games, because we wanted to make sure that the submitters knew what they were rating. But for brevity, we're just including like the very basic skill or experience.
Okay, so we're going to look at the top 10 skills and experiences rankings from the survey. On the left column is the individual philosophy top 10, and on the right column is the institutional importance ranking, also top 10. Both columns are ranked on their average, with 5 being the highest. Looking at the top 5, we see quite a bit of similarity between the two. So here the skills are color-coded for kind of easier comparison. We notice that both the individual philosophy and the institutional importance have the top 3 of collaboration with performers, control of melodic material, and control of harmonic material. Orchestration fundamentals and standard notation are both at the 4 and 5 spot, but just switched between the two categories. So far we see that there's strong agreement between the individual philosophies and the institutional importance. Additionally, I would say maybe like these top tier kind of rankings or skills are what I think we would probably expect to say near the top of these rankings here. It's really not until we get to the 6 to 10 rankings that we start to see some variation between the two different categories. Again, we see that the skills and experiences are color-coded for comparison. In the second half of the top 10, there's only 2 matching skills and experiences, and this is control of rhythmic material, which is the 6th in both categories, and control of large-scale structures, which is 9th in individual philosophy and 7th in institutional. Some of the skills and experiences on one top 10 didn't quite make it into the other categories top 10. So we have heightened listening, which ranked 3 positions higher in individual philosophy, and this 13 sport. Here the color coding are slightly changed. The green is indicated as to which is higher between the two rankings. And then we have score study analysis, which ranked 4 positions higher in the institutional importance, with 9th place, while it ranked 13th in individual philosophy. Other elements here are control of timbral materials, which ranked 3 positions higher in institutional importance, while ensemble readings ranked 4 positions higher in the individual philosophy. Development of individual style ranked 5 positions higher in institutional importance at the 10th position, while compared to 15th in the individual philosophy. And then finally, from this top 10 area, the exposure to unfamiliar musics had the largest difference, by a ranking of 8 positions higher in the individual philosophy, and at the 7th position, while 15th in the institutional importance. So just as the top rankings can reveal what we think is important, the bottom rankings might reveal what we think maybe isn't as important. Similar to the agreement we see in the top 10, the bottom 5 rankings and skills are nearly the same. The bottom 4 positions are the same skills and experiences with only just slightly different rankings. And so we see that these are stylistic improvisation, jazz composition, commercial music, and text setting of various languages or other languages. The really only variance we see is in the 35th and 36th positions. So if we went to the bottom 6 instead of the bottom 5, those 2 places have kind of interchanged with synthesis and programming, and I've lost. And then the other spot there, which is, so the experience playing multiple instruments, and then the synthesis and programming. So now Bradley's going to dig a little deeper and do some cross-tab analysis.
Thanks, Andy. So one of the things about this survey is that it was massive. It was very big, and if any of you in here actually took the survey, thank you for taking the 45 minutes it took to take the survey. And because we collected so much data, we can actually do something called cross-tab analysis, which we can take out certain demographics and see if they rank things differently based on things like how long they've been a teacher, or what type of school they work at, or things of that nature. So there's lots we could do here, but we're going to keep it to years teaching and appointment type, just for A, the sake of brevity, and 2, we found a lot of interesting variations here. So first off, top and bottom 5, we're going to do something very similar to how Andy broke down the main list for us. As we can see here, the color coding is very similar. I'm going to just move Andy's face a little bit. There we go. And so we broke down into 3 categories, 1 to 10 years, 10 to 20, and then 20 plus years teachers. The numbers in parentheses, those are the number of respondents we had for those particular categories. And this is based on individual philosophy, not the institution. Color coding is mostly the same here, where similar colors means it's about the same. So collaboration with performers, no matter how we parsed out the data, it was still near the top. Control of harmonic material, things like that. One big outlier we have here, though, is, I have a laser pointer, by the way, is development of individual style, which what's interesting about this is it's in the full list, it was number 15th, so in the top 20, great, at a 4.01 rating. But in a lot of our reading, we found that developing your individual style in a lot of places is relegated to graduate study. So it's interesting to see it here in the 10 to 20 year range of teachers that they think it's number 4th most important. Then finally, this is going to be fun. We get to the bottom 5. So again, a lot of the same stuff still stays active. Popular commercial music is still down there, unfortunately. And then when we get to the 20-plus year teacher range, media composition is dead last at 2.48, 40th place. It's tied only with popular and commercial music because it can't catch a break. And in the main list, it's the 30th. It's number 30th. So not near the top by any stretch of the imagination, but not in the absolute bottom place. And also it had a 3.44 average, so it's an entire point swing from one demographic to the other. Do the thing. So finally we get to appointment type. We had 3 types: non-tenured, tenured track, and tenured. To be fair, there were other appointment types we had in there, but we just simply did not have enough respondents of that type, like adjunct professors, like I was when I made this survey, so that was fun. But we have non-tenured, 5 non-tenured, 18 tenured track, and then 70 tenured. So what do we have there? That does not work. Similar things, collaboration with performers still very high. Exposure to other art forms is now number 1 for non-tenured professors. Now, obviously, something should be said, which is we only had 5 respondents, so that could skew the data, obviously. But with a 4.88 average, that means 4 out of 5 rated at a 5 and only 1 rated at a 4, so it must be very important to non-tenured professors. Bottom 5, kind of the same stuff here. The outlier in the tenured professor range is digital audio workstation experience, which they do not highlight very much at all. And the main list is 23rd, which is in the middle with a 3.67 average. But here, digital audio workstation experience is number 36 with a 2.85 average, so not important at all to the tenured professors. So lastly, we're going to kind of end on just other findings and potential future research we can have. We didn't know where else to put it, so we put it here. So first off, this is kind of gets at what Andy was talking about a second ago. In general, the higher the average, the lower the standard deviation. The lower the average, the higher the standard deviation. So what does that mean? It means that we tend to really agree on what's important, and we tend to really disagree on what's not. So the bottom 20, it skews quite wildly to who ranks at a 5 versus who ranks at a 1. But the top ones, like I said, they stay pretty static. Male respondents generally had a lower standard deviation, which means that they agreed a lot more. Female respondents tended to have a higher standard deviation, especially including text setting, other language, DAW experience, engraving skills, and stylistic improvisation, and free improvisation. But of course, once again, this could be a skewed data thing because we only had 10 female respondents versus 81, which is something we should correct for in the future. Collaboration with performers universally ranks highly. And because it ranks highly, we ask the question, okay, so are we doing a good job engendering this type of collaboration? So we actually accounted for that in the survey. 56% of respondents had student-led ensembles at the university. 38% had new music ensembles that performed to student works, which seems fairly low. On the other side of that, 85% had annual or semesterly composition concerts, and 75% had major ensemble readings. So they were getting some form of collaboration somehow at these universities. And finally, it goes without saying at this point, but it should be said. I'm gonna have to move Andy's face one more time. Some of these crosstab analyses just are not definitive because there are certain types of demographics we just did not get for various reasons. I don't think it's very surprising to anyone here. Respondents were overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly male, and that's something we should correct for in the future on both sides of things, both in research and in hiring. All right, brief concluding remarks. I know I said I was concluding before, but I'm serious about it this time. Many findings have been omitted from this presentation for time. You can see that I'm talking very fast. And then finally, if you were at our SCI talk about a year and a half ago, we said this, and we do mean it. It's going to happen eventually, but we're going to put our survey data online eventually as a spreadsheet so everyone can peruse, because there's a lot of it, and Andy and I are not data scientists, and that was an interesting thing to figure out after we got it. But we are going to put it online so it can be useful to people. And finally, I've given this to you. This is the full skills and experience ranking parsed between individual and program, and it's based high to low on the individual opinion. And finally, questions if we have time for it. Yes.
I think I saw Jimmy's hand first.
Yeah.
So, it was striking that jazz and pop music were so unprioritized in the study, and I was wondering if you had ideas about why that is, and I have an idea about why that is that maybe you could respond to, which is that there are programs that are jazz programs and there's pop music programs, and I assume that those were not included in this survey, even though the people...
You mean we sent the people we sent it to?
Yeah, like were there respondents who were in like a pop music production track?
I'll say, before I get to your first question, I'll say that we sent it to people in those programs.
Okay.
We do not know whether they responded because it was anonymous.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So, Andy, you want to take that first part of the question, or should I?
I'll make a comment and then you can
Sure.
chime in as well. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure why that skewed low. I think one thing that I noticed in kind of looking through the things that weren't maybe like a traditional composition skills or experiences kind of tended to go a little low. And that's maybe my only guess, that it's not kind of traditionally what composers do, if that even is a thing.
And to kind of go on that same question, it's probably that a lot of these programs are, say it kindly, going by what they know. Going by what they know, they might not know popular and commercial music that much. In a worst case scenario, they might even look down on it. Who knows? I can't speak for them, but I do know that especially if you're looking at, for instance, like grad school. If you're having to prepare students to go to grad school, you have a certain set of requirements you have to do. And you know what's not on that requirement in a lot of cases? Popular and commercial music. So even if they're not interested in doing it, they might be interested in doing it, but they might be pushed into doing this other thing. So that's kind of a roundabout way to answer your question. It's a lot of things, I think. Yeah.
Thank you. Did you collect data on types of programs? So whether it was a BA program or
Yes.
a Bachelor of Music program, whether it was jazz, pop, or just kind of general composition as a catch-all? I'd just be curious to know that kind of data as well.
Yeah, we absolutely did. We collected data on the different types of programs. In fact, that was one of the things that Andy and I had to figure out, was how many different types of different programs there were, and to put it into like a survey that was manageable. Turns out there's a lot of ways you can say Bachelor of Music, and they all, some of them are different, some of them are different just only in name, and we also accounted for things like liberal arts college versus research university versus that. So we did both in two different questions. We just didn't talk about it here. And Andy, do you want to say anything about that?
Maybe not that specifically, but we did also ask what each degree tried to prepare their students for. And so asking like, is your main goal for your students to go to grad school or to do this or to, so maybe that kind of cross-tabbing that can maybe answer some of that as well.
Yeah, and that's one of the many cross-tabs that could be done if we had more than 20 minutes. Yeah. Yes, Jeff.
Yes, so I'm looking at this handout that you have, and I see the rankings as they compare individual versus program. And it seems that there's a lot of correlation or a lot of similarity between the individual and program rankings for each of the categories. There are a few, there's a bit of deviation. And part of that may be because people didn't have to give some things a one ranking. It wasn't like a strict ordering from highest to lowest. It was, the rankings were all independent, I assume. But I'm wondering if you noticed that and if you had any conclusions about perhaps program focuses influencing individual focuses, either in the hiring process or as people work together, perhaps developing some common ideas about teaching.
Yeah, Andy, do you have? I think you talked about a little bit about the discrepancies between the individual and the institution. Do you have something to say about that?
I'm sorry, what was I didn't quite hear the...
So there's a lot of similarities between the institutional rankings and the individual rankings in terms, they're very similar. There's not a whole lot of like, one's really high, one's really low.
Yeah, I think most of that is true, that there is a lot of similarities, and there are kind of those few outliers that, like I think in what I said was the exploring other musics, and I think exposure to other art forms has a really big disparity. And so I'm not 100% sure as to why or where that kind of breaks down exactly. I think some things are more challenging to put into a curriculum, like exposure to other art forms. I don't know how that is going to exactly get into a curriculum, or some of that may be the different individual schools or philosophies.
Yeah, and to add to that, it might be kind of what you said, which is that in the hiring process you hire out not necessarily based on they do exactly what I do, so I'm going to hire them, but like at least some like synergy. And there are some in there that are really broadly different. The one that I kind of go to is the model composition pre-1900s. There's a pretty big gulf between those two because, as we know, theory a lot of times is based on tonal theory for the first 2 years, usually. So again, it could be like a number of different things. And it could be a sign that maybe teachers are teaching the things that they want to teach. Could very well be that. So, yeah. We're out of time.
Yeah, sorry for the abbreviated Q&A. It was a fascinating data set, and there's a lot to think about there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all for having us.